You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this underlying expectation of precision.
Right, like it's a math equation or something.
Exactly. It's like engineering. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line in your radius, and the doctor just points at the film and says, well, there it is. There's the break.
It's a binary system.
Yeah.
Broken or not broken. It's clean, and, I mean, more importantly, it's comforting.
Yeah.
We naturally gravitate toward things that can be made visible,
Right.
things we can neatly categorize and treat.
But then you step out of the sterile clinic and into the world of folklore, of mythology, and specifically inherited trauma.
Oh, yeah. That's where it gets messy.
Right. Suddenly, that x-ray machine is completely broken. Because when a society undergoes centuries of unspeakable suffering, how does that collective trauma physically manifest?
Where does it go?
Exactly. Where does all that compressed generational pain actually go? Today, we are answering that exact question for you by opening up the bloody, suppressed history inside Soraya Bouazzaoui's upcoming 2026 fantasy novel, Aicha.
Which is just a phenomenal piece of work.
It really is. We've got a massive stack of excerpts here, author's notes, prologues, pivotal chapters, and we are looking directly at you, our listener, to help us unpack this deep dive.
Yeah, we're going into some dark territory today.
For sure. It's a story that pushes a young woman so far beyond the limits of humanity that she essentially becomes like a god of vengeance.
And we really need to set the historical stage before we even touch the magic system, because the author grounds this narrative in a very specific, agonizing reality.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where are we starting?
So the text blends this incredibly dark mythology with the real-world historical occupation of the Moroccan city of El Jadida, which was formerly known as Mazagan.
Right.
We are dropped into a fictionalized Moroccan citadel in the year 1769. This is a walled city that has been under Portuguese siege and violent occupation for nearly 4 centuries, under the banner of King Joseph I.
I really need you to pause and let that timeline sink in for a second if you're listening. 4 centuries.
It's staggering.
That is not an occupation you survive. That is an occupation that rewrites your DNA. We are talking about, what, 15 generations of people who have never known what it means to breathe free air in their own homeland?
It completely redefines the concept of normal. The Maghrebis, the native Moroccan population in this citadel, they are entirely marginalized.
Literally pushed to the edges.
Exactly. The author details how they are cramped into the southernmost sector of the city. Their homes are quite literally pushed up against the massive stone walls.
Wow.
It creates this physical manifestation of their societal marginalization. They are backed into a corner.
And the Portuguese colonizers aren't just taking their physical space, right? They are actively, systematically erasing their identity.
That's the core of it, yeah.
The excerpts make it chillingly clear. Practicing Islam has been strictly forbidden for the entirety of this occupation.
Yeah, any texts containing prayers are immediately burned.
Which is just heartbreaking. And wearing a hijab isn't just frowned upon. It is prosecuted as an act of violent sedition against the Portuguese crown. To hold on to your culture is a capital offense.
This is the textbook mechanics of colonial erasure. You strip the occupied people of their religion, their language, their autonomy, and, crucially, their means of self-defense.
Right. No weapons allowed.
None. The Maghrebis are banned from carrying any weapons, and the punishment is death by hanging.
Jesus.
But the author introduces an immediate escalating threat that takes this from a chronic misery to an acute apocalyptic crisis.
Right, because there's a second army involved here. To put this in perspective for you, imagine being trapped in your own hometown. A hostile foreign military has locked the gates from the inside, heavily armed and policing your every move.
Nowhere to go.
But outside those walls, your own country's army, the Sultan's Maghrebi forces, have completely surrounded the city, establishing a massive blockade.
The Sultan's army cuts off the citadel from the sea. The Portuguese supply lines are completely severed. Nothing gets in, and no one gets out.
You are effectively trapped in a cage match. You're being starved by the people outside who are trying to save you, and you are being brutalized by the people inside who are holding you hostage.
It's a lose-lose situation.
Completely. The water is strictly rationed, and obviously the Portuguese soldiers take their fill first.
Of course.
The Maghrebis get whatever muddy dregs are left. Fish is scarce because no one is allowed beyond the bay. And the Portuguese general in charge is so stubbornly, pathologically proud that instead of surrendering to the Sultan's massive army, he chooses to just lock the heavy gates and let the local population slowly starve to death.
The environmental design of this setting is a masterclass in psychological pressure. You see the systemic starvation in the citadel, and it makes you wonder,
How long they can last.
exactly, how long can a human body absorb that kind of environmental violence before the body itself starts manufacturing a weapon in response?
Wow.
The physical walls, the dwindling resources, the arbitrary cruelties of Portuguese guards like this particularly sadistic officer named Duarte, they are creating a tectonic pressure zone.
Let me jump in here, because I was thinking of this earlier. When I first read these chapters, my instinct was to compare the Citadel to a sealed pot on a roaring fire, right?
The classic pressure cooker.
Exactly. The pressure just builds until the lid blows off. But the more I sit with the text, the more I realize that analogy is, like, way too passive.
How so?
A pot just sits there. This environment feels more like a hydraulic press. It is actively mechanically crushing everything inside it.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Every legitimate avenue for existence. Praying to your God, eating a full meal, walking down the street without being assaulted. It's all being systematically crushed out of existence.
That's a much more accurate framework. And when you apply a hydraulic press to a human population, survival requires finding the microscopic fractures in the system and expanding them, which is exactly what the Sanhaji family is doing. They're just passively waiting to be crushed.
They are actively undermining the press.
Yes.
The Sanhajis are officially registered as blacksmiths for the Portuguese. They make the horseshoes, the nails, the mundane metalwork the colonizers need.
But secretly,
Secretly, the patriarch, Fuad, is running a high-stakes black market armory.
which is so dangerous.
Incredibly dangerous. The text describes this incredible hidden cellar beneath his study. You pull back a rug, lift some loose geometric zealage tiles, and underneath is a stockpile of bladed weapons for the Maghridi resistance.
There's a brilliant, dark irony to Fuad's operation here.
Right.
He uses the wealth he accumulates from playing the submissive, compliant blacksmith to the Portuguese.
To forge the very steel that the resistance will use to slit their throats.
Exactly. He is funding his own liberation using the oppressor's coin.
And his youngest daughter, Aicha, our protagonist, she's the one working the forge.
She's the one making the weapons.
Yeah, she is literally in the heat and the soot, hammering the steel. There's a scene early on in chapter 1 that establishes exactly who she is. A Portuguese merchant walks into the shop.
Oh, this scene is so good.
It sets everything up. He's sweaty, sunburned, clearly uncomfortable in the North African climate, and he has the sheer audacity to demand weapons on credit.
Unbelievable.
Right, and when Aicha refuses, he insults her, calling her a desert rat.
That specific slur is incredibly loaded.
Yeah, tell me about it.
It's designed to strip her of her humanity, to reduce her to a pest in her own ancestral home. It highlights the deeply ingrained racial prejudice that fuels the entire occupation.
Right.
The colonizer views the colonized not as people, but as part of the harsh, hostile fauna that needs to be exterminated.
But Aicha does not shrink. She doesn't lower her eyes. She leans across the counter, grabs this grown man who outweighs her significantly, and digs her fingers directly into a pressure point on his collarbone.
Just zero hesitation.
None. She grips it so hard, he starts screaming in agony right there in the shop, and she doesn't let go until he chokes out an apology.
It's a very calculated physical exertion of power. She doesn't punch him, which would be an uncontrolled outburst.
True.
She uses a precise, paralyzing grip. It tells us that Aicha is simmering with violence, but she currently has it on a leash. She knows exactly how to inflict maximum pain with minimal movement.
Well, hold on. Think about the mechanics of that. If the penalty for a Maghribi carrying a weapon is a public hanging,
Which it is.
then assaulting a Portuguese citizen, even a merchant, should be an immediate death sentence. Why would she risk her life and her family's entire underground operation over a verbal insult?
It seems reckless.
Right. Is she just reckless, or is there something else driving her?
It's not recklessness. It's a symptom of a much deeper pathology.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what we see happening biologically inside our protagonist.
I could break that down for us.
Aicha is carrying an internal hydraulic press that mirrors the external one of the Citadel. To understand why she risks everything in that moment, we have to look at the anatomy of her specific rage.
Yeah, because Aicha is an incredibly complex character. She's hot-headed, defiant, but beneath all of that, she is drowning in this crushing weight of survivor's guilt.
Which stems from the very beginning of her life.
Right. The prologue of the book details the night she was born. Her mother, Tadla, died in childbirth.
And while her father, Fuad, tells the story of her mother's death with deep reverence and love, Aicha internalizes it as a murder.
She blames herself entirely.
Yes. She believes her mere existence cost her father the absolute love of his life. She views her own breath as a theft.
Which creates this intense, volatile dynamic with her older sister, Samira.
Oh, Samira's fascinating.
Because Samira didn't kill their mother. Samira is the golden child, and the contrast between the two sisters is brilliantly drawn. Samira is ice cold.
Very calculated.
She is. She's the ultimate night smuggler. The text describes her slipping through the shadows in dark leathers, navigating these claustrophobic underground tunnels to deliver weapons and coded messages to the Sultan's men outside the walls.
Samira is methodical. She processes the trauma of the occupation by becoming a ghost in the machine.
Wow. Yeah.
She's highly disciplined, channeling all her anger into actionable, strategic resistance. She's exactly the kind of soldier her father needs.
Meanwhile, Aicha is practically vibrating out of her skin. She's stuck at the forge, doing the mundane chores, scrubbing rust off arrowheads, desperate to prove her worth to a father she believes resents her.
It's such a heavy burden for a teenager.
But the real difference between the sisters isn't just their personalities. Aicha is dealing with an element that Samira couldn't even comprehend. There is something profoundly wrong inside Aicha's mind.
The author introduces a supernatural element here that completely recontextualizes Aicha's anger.
What is she dealing with?
Well, since she was a child, Aicha has been plagued by a voice. Not just an intrusive thought, but a distinct separate consciousness living within her that actively begs for blood.
That is terrifying.
She suffers from these agonizing, recurring nightmares of a creature, and the description is horrifying. The creature looks exactly like Aicha, but its skin is deathly pale, its eyes are solid, onyx black, and it constantly releases this unending scream of pure, visceral agony.
And in the dreams, doesn't it attack her?
Yeah, in her dreams, this thing violently tears at Aicha's own throat.
It's pure body horror. And it's not just confined to her dreams. When Aicha is threatened in the waking world, this voice wakes up.
It's fully active.
It acts like a demonic coach in her ear, whispering these hyper-violent commands. It tells her, cut out their tongues, rip their eyes out. It wants to dismantle anyone who poses a threat.
The psychological layering Bouazzaoui achieves here is phenomenal. The narrative forces you to ask, is this a supernatural entity, or is this the ultimate manifestation of generational trauma?
That's the big question.
The trauma of the colonial occupation, compounded by the intimate personal trauma of her mother's death, creates a massive psychological void in Aicha. And this dark entity, whatever it is, rushes in to fill that void.
I want to float a theory here, building on our earlier medical analogy.
Let's hear it.
When I read the passages describing this voice, it didn't feel like a traditional demonic possession.
How do you mean?
In most possession stories, the demon wants to corrupt the host, right? Make them do evil things to innocent people.
Like The Exorcist or something.
Exactly. But Aicha's entity feels more like a twisted, hyper-aggressive immune system.
Oh, that's interesting.
If colonialism is the virus, this darkness isn't an external infection. It's the cultural antibodies going into absolute overdrive. When she is attacked, this entity deploys like white blood cells to violently, ruthlessly destroy the threat in order to protect the host body.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. An autoimmune response can be just as deadly as the virus itself.
Right.
The body becomes so obsessed with eradicating the threat that it begins to destroy its own healthy tissue. The entity wants to protect Aicha, but its method of protection requires Aicha to shed her humanity, her empathy, her moral compass.
It requires her to become a monster to survive the monsters occupying her city.
Exactly. And you see this tension beautifully represented in her physical appearance. The text goes out of its way to ground Aicha in her Moroccan culture.
Right, she has those traditional tattoos.
She bears these beautiful facial markings. She has the siala, which is a thin green tattooed line running down her chin, marking her transition into womanhood. And she has the gamaza, a series of diamond tattoos between her eyebrows meant for spiritual protection. These are the exact markings her mother had. They are undeniable declarations of her indigenous identity.
They are permanent, visible acts of rebellion against a colonial force that wants to erase her culture. She wears her heritage right on her face.
She does.
But then you contrast that beautiful, culturally grounded exterior with the absolute feral horror of what happens in the underground cistern. Because this is the moment the immune system deploys.
The cistern scene is the point of no return for Aicha's psyche.
Set that up for us.
So she and Samira are down in the damp, echoing underground water reserves, trying to steal critical supplies for the resistance. But they make a mistake. They are ambushed by a Portuguese guard.
Right.
And suddenly, the guard has a heavy steel sword pressed directly into Samira's chest.
And the moment Aicha sees the blade against her sister, something just snaps. The leash breaks.
She goes feral.
She doesn't hesitate. She doesn't think about the consequences. She throws her entire body weight at the guard, wraps her arm around his neck, and drives a dagger deep into his throat. She makes her first kill.
It's brutal.
But the act of killing isn't even the most shocking part of this scene. It's her internal monologue while he dies.
That's where the text shifts from historical fiction into psychological horror.
Exactly. A normal person, a hero in a standard fantasy novel, they would be traumatized, they would vomit, they would shake, they would feel the crushing weight of taking a human life.
Right, the typical guilt.
But Aicha feels none of that. She stands there watching the hot blood pour over her hands. She specifically notes the pretty pink flesh of the man's ruined throat. And she feels a deep, chilling satisfaction. She feels right.
The entity inside her absolutely rejoices. It has finally tasted blood, and it is ecstatic.
It's terrifying.
And the scary part for Aicha is that she finds herself agreeing with it. The boundary between Aicha, the human girl, and the entity, the ancient killer, completely dissolves in that cistern.
But let me stop you right there, because this is where I really struggle.
Okay.
If she feels no remorse, if she actively enjoys watching a man bleed out, isn't she just a psychopath?
I mean,
Is the entity actually evil, or is Aicha just using the entity as a convenient excuse to indulge her own inherent sadism? Like, is this just the purest distillation of the suppressed rage of an occupied people finally finding an outlet?
you are hitting on the central thematic tension of the entire novel. The author refuses to give you an easy answer.
It's so frustrating, but so good.
Is Aicha a psychopath? Is she a vessel for a literal jinn? Or is she a young woman whose mind is completely fractured under the weight of 400 years of inherited colonial violence?
And Aicha herself doesn't know.
Aicha herself is paralyzed by this exact question. She is deeply afraid of her own mind. She knows the Quran outlaws murder, and she fears that her enjoyment of this violence means she is fundamentally broken.
Yeah.
She is terrified that she is condemned to Jahannam, to hell.
She thinks she's spiritually damned. She thinks she is a monster walking among humans. And that isolation, that absolute terror of her own soul, it drives her to seek out the only people in the Citadel who might actually understand what's happening beneath her skin.
She needs guidance.
She has to find someone who knows about the dark things that go bump in the night.
Which brings us to a completely different sector of the city and a completely different kind of power structure. Aicha goes to the gardens.
Okay, we need to spend some time on the gardens because this place is fascinating. It's an underground sanctuary, a hidden pocket of magic right under the noses of the colonizers.
It's amazing.
It's run by a woman named Lala Ilham, who acts as this fierce maternal figure, and it's where Aicha's best friend, Naima, lives and works.
The gardens represents the intersection of magic, extreme marginalization, and inevitable fate. It is the domain of the Shawafas.
For our listeners who might not be familiar with the term, explain what a Shawafa is in this context.
In Moroccan culture, and specifically in the world of this novel, Shawafas are female seers. They are women who possess the sight. They commune with jinns.
Spirits made of smokeless fire.
Exactly. And they can read the threads of fate and destiny. They wield very real, very potent spiritual magic.
And because they hold this strange, untamed power, they occupy this incredibly precarious, dangerous position in the Citadel society. They're trapped in the middle.
How so?
Well, the Portuguese invaders view them as exotic, superstitious novelties. They tolerate them because they don't see them as a military threat.
Oh, right.
But the Maghribis are terrified of them. Aicha's father, Fuad, strictly forbids his daughters from ever associating with the Shawafas or stepping foot in the gardens.
He hates them.
He firmly believes that dealing with magic and communing with jinn is a guaranteed one-way ticket straight to Jahannam.
Yeah, he draws a very hard line there.
See, this is the part that made me literally pause my reading. I have to call out the staggering hypocrisy here.
Oh, the hypocrisy is wild.
Fuad is literally running a black market weapons forge. He is stockpiling steel to fund a violent, bloody, throat-slitting revolution.
Yes.
He is perfectly fine with his teenage daughter smuggling lethal weapons through dark tunnels, knowing they could be hung by their necks at any moment. But he draws his moral line at magic.
It doesn't seem to make sense.
He's okay with murder, but he's terrified of his daughter talking to a psychic with some tarot cards and incense. Why is spiritual unorthodoxy seen as so much more dangerous than literal warfare?
It seems like a massive contradiction on the surface, but you have to look at the mechanics of control.
Okay, lay it on me.
Warfare, even guerrilla warfare, is a known entity. It operates on physical rules. It's men fighting men for land, resources, and power. Fuad understands a sword. He can forge a sword, he can wield a sword, and he can control who gets a sword.
Right. It's a patriarchal power structure.
Exactly, but magic. Specifically, the magic wielded by the Shawafas. That represents an uncontrollable, unseen, entirely female power.
Oh, wow.
Society, especially society under extreme military pressure, can understand a blade. It cannot understand and therefore cannot control a woman who speaks to ancient spirits and sees the future. The patriarchy fears what it cannot regulate.
That makes so much sense.
So despite holding immense spiritual power, these women are pushed to the absolute fringes. They are marginalized by the colonizers and ostracized by their own people.
Yet, ironically, they're the only ones who can offer Aicha any real comfort. After her father is brutally publicly beaten by Duarte, the Portuguese officer we mentioned earlier, Aicha is spiraling.
She's losing it.
The entity inside her is screaming for revenge. She goes to the gardens, seeking solace from Lala Ilham, and she essentially breaks down. She confesses.
It's a really vulnerable moment.
She tells Ilham about the dark shadows she sees in the corners of her vision, the bloodlust, the voice that whispers instructions on how to dismantle human bodies.
And instead of recoiling, instead of calling her a demon or a sinner, Ilham gives her a chilling, monumental revelation.
What does she say?
She looks at Aicha and tells her that she is not crazy, but she's also not a Shawafa.
Wait, how is she different? If she's hearing a jinn, doesn't that make her a seer?
Ilham explains the distinction. Shawafas spend years, decades, honing their sight. They build relationships with spirits over time. Aicha's connection is fundamentally different. It's ancient and it's absolute.
Okay.
Ilham tells Aicha that she is uniquely bound to a spectacularly powerful jinn, and not just a garden variety spirit, but a creature of immense age and fury that has never walked the mortal realm.
So they're fused.
Yes. Ilham tells her, "You are bound in realms beyond this lifetime. You are hers, and she is yours."
You are hers and she is yours. God, it's a terrifying validation. It confirms Aicha's deepest fear. She isn't losing her mind, the monster is real, and they are permanently fused together.
She's doomed.
And the way the author writes the gardens makes this revelation feel so heavy. The sensory details are incredible. You can practically smell the thick, heavy scent of Bakhor sandalwood incense burning in the air.
The atmosphere is so thick.
You can see the vibrant, jewel-toned caftans shifting in the dim candlelight. You can feel the sticky floors beneath your boots from years of spilled, cheap wine. It's a place designed for sensory overload. A place where the oppressed go to drink and smoke and briefly forget the harsh, violent reality of the citadel above them.
But the tragedy of the gardens is that reality always intrudes. You can't hide from fate. And Naima, Aicha's best friend, uses her sight to look directly into Aicha's future.
Oh, this part.
Naima peers into the threads of destiny, and what she sees utterly horrifies her.
She sees the end of the road.
Yes, she does.
She tells Aicha plainly that she has seen what will befall her if she stays in the citadel. She doesn't get specifics, but she makes it clear that Aicha's path leads only to unspeakable pain, profound loss, and a gruesome death.
And Naima is desperate.
She is weeping, begging Aicha to pack her bags, leave her family, and escape the city with the smugglers before the siege breaks. She wants to save her friend's life.
And how does Aicha respond to this act of desperate love?
She explodes. Aicha feels profoundly betrayed. She views Naima's warning not as a lifesaver, but as cowardice.
Right.
Aicha screams at her that she already knows the risks. She knows she might die. But the citadel is her home. These are her people, and she absolutely refuses to abandon her family to save her own skin. It causes this massive, heartbreaking rift between the two girls.
It highlights a crucial element of Aicha's character. Her profound, unbreakable loyalty to her home and her family is simultaneously her greatest strength and her fatal flaw.
Yeah.
She's incapable of running away, which means she is locking herself onto a collision course with her own doom.
But they don't leave things broken, which I think is vital for Aicha's humanity. They do reconcile in this incredibly quiet, emotional, almost dreamlike underwater scene.
That scene is stunning.
Naima is waiting down by the docks. Aicha swims out to her, they submerge, and they hold hands underwater in the silence. And Maima takes this little woven bracelet, a bracelet that Aicha's love interest, Rachid, had made for her, and Naima slowly ties it back onto Aicha's wrist.
That underwater setting is so symbolic. They are drowning in this situation, submerged beneath the weight of the war. And Naima tying the bracelet is an act of silent, tragic acceptance.
She's letting her go.
Naima knows that fate cannot be rewritten. She knows Aisha's path is set in stone. Gifting the bracelet back is her way of saying, I accept your choice to stay, even though I know it means I'm going to lose you.
It's a beautiful, quiet moment of grace, but it's the last moment of peace in the entire novel, because Naima's magical warnings were completely, horrifyingly accurate.
Unavoidable.
The doom she foresaw arrives, and it arrives with blinding, brutal speed. We are moving out of the shadows and directly into the catalyst of the entire narrative, the absolute destruction of the Sanhaji family.
The narrative pivot here is gut-wrenching. The author uses sudden, devastating loss to snap Aicha's final tether to her humanity. It happens on an ordinary day. Aicha is out near the docks and she suddenly spots a thick plume of dark, greasy smoke rising from the direction of the town square.
And Aicha knows exactly what that smoke means. The Portuguese military doesn't just execute Maghrebis. They burn their bodies after hangings to deny them proper Islamic burial rites.
It's an awful insult to injury.
It's a final posthumous act of cultural erasure.
She immediately panics. She sprints away from the docks, but she can't just run down the street. She has to crawl on her hands and knees through the filth and the dirt of the alleys, hiding behind barrels and carts to avoid the patrols.
The physical degradation of crawling through the dirt mirrors her internal dread. She finally reaches the edge of the town square. She looks up at the massive wooden gallows. She's praying, begging whatever God is listening, that it's just some random smugglers, that it's not anyone she knows.
The suspense is terrible.
And then her eyes adjust to the smoke, and she sees them, dangling from the ropes. Her father, Fuad, and her brilliant, unbreakable sister, Samira, executed in the town square for everyone to see.
The author forces the reader to sit in the visceral horror of this moment. Aicha's entire world, her entire anchor to her humanity and her sense of self, is completely annihilated in an instant. The family she stayed in the citadel to protect is gone.
And the cruelty of the colonizers knows absolutely no bounds, because Duarte, the sadistic officer who orchestrated this, doesn't just kill them. Later, when he crosses paths with Aicha, he actively gloats about the execution.
He is a monster.
He weaponizes her grief. He tells her in excruciating detail exactly what happened before the ropes went around their necks.
And it is so hard to read.
He tells Aicha that he beat Samira with his bare hands until her face was completely unrecognizable, until her eyeballs literally burst in their sockets from the trauma. And the worst part, he made Fuad, the proud, protective patriarch, watch his golden child be dismantled, and made him weep before hanging them both.
It is a calculated act of sadistic psychological warfare. Duarte is trying to break Aicha's spirit entirely, but he completely miscalculates the chemistry of what is happening inside her.
Right, he doesn't know what's in there.
He thinks he is hammering a nail into her coffin, but he is actually striking the flint that will burn his entire world to the ground. This grief is so absolute, so sudden and vast, that it completely hollows Aicha out. There is nothing left of the girl.
She manages to escape Duarte temporarily and stumbles back to her family's forge, but the doors are smashed in. The house has been completely ransacked by the guards looking for the weapons cache.
Yeah.
And she finds a single invading Portuguese soldier still inside, tearing through her family's belongings. And this is the moment. This is the metamorphosis.
The point of no return.
Aicha looks at this soldier in her destroyed home, and she completely, willingly loses control. She takes her hands off the wheel and gives the entity full reign.
Notice how the text shifts its descriptive language here. Up until this point, the voice was a separate entity, whispering to her. But in the forge, the voice in her head and her own voice finally synchronize.
They become one.
They harmonize. She doesn't fight the darkness anymore, she embraces it. Because her human heart is too small to hold this much grief. The entity is the only thing large enough to contain her agony.
And the violence that follows is staggering. It's not combat, it's a slaughter.
It really is.
Aicha drops her own weapon. The soldier swings his sword at her, and she catches the razor-sharp blade with her bare hand.
Just grabs the steel.
She lets the steel slice deep into her palm, completely unbothered by the pain. She yanks the blade aside, leaps onto the much larger man, and lunges for his throat. But not with a knife. She literally bites into his Adam's apple.
Oh, man.
She locks her jaw like a wild dog, and with a violent jerk of her neck, she rips his throat out with her teeth.
It is a profoundly feral, animalistic act. She has shed the rules of human combat. She has abandoned the concept of honorable warfare. This is an apex predator dispatching prey.
And she doesn't stop when he's dead. She spits out the flesh, reaches down, and picks up the hilt of a broken sword from the floor. Specifically, it's a sword bearing her father's maker's mark, a 5-point star stamped into the steel.
That detail is so important.
And she uses that heavy pommel to repeatedly mechanically smash the dead soldier's face into the stone floor. She turns his face into a slurry of bone fragments and softened flesh. She is directly, explicitly avenging what Duarte did to Samira's face.
This is a terrifying, sickening scene, but it serves a crucial narrative purpose. It marks the definitive death of Aicha the girl and the violent incubation of Aicha the monster.
I have to ask you a really dark question here because I was trying to wrap my head around this level of brutality.
Yeah, go for it.
They say that grief is just love with nowhere to go. If that's true, does Aisha's immense love for her father and sister instantly metabolize into this feral, horrific violence because she literally has no other outlet for it?
Precisely. That is the tragedy of her condition. The violence isn't a lack of love. The violence is the ultimate expression of her love.
Wow.
It is the only language left to her when the people she loves are stolen. The jinn, the supernatural entity, feeds on that exact alchemy. It thrives on love that has been twisted by profound systemic injustice into boundless rage.
But the author pulls off a miracle here. Amidst this horrific bloodbath, as Aisha is literally kneeling in a puddle of gore, caving a dead man's skull in with a piece of steel, a single pair of hands manages to reach through the darkness and pull her back from the brink of total madness.
Rachid.
Yes, Rachid. We need to talk about Rachid, because he is the anchor of this story. He is Aisha's childhood friend, her lifelong sparring partner, her fellow smuggler, and he is deeply, quietly in love with her.
Rachid is the narrative counterweight to the entity. He represents the illusion of a future.
He walks into the ransacked forge. He sees the destroyed house, the mutilated corpse, and he sees the woman he loves covered head to toe in blood and brain matter, panting like a wild animal.
And crucially, he does not recoil. He doesn't draw his weapon. He doesn't call her a monster.
He walks up behind her, wraps his arms around her shaking body, and just holds her tightly. He becomes a physical restraint made of pure empathy.
It's a beautiful moment.
He holds her until the entity recedes, until she stops fighting and collapses against him. And then the tenderness of the next scene is staggering. He sits her down, he gets a damp cloth, and he tenderly washes the crusted blood from her face.
That's a sharp contrast.
He threads a needle and carefully sews up the deep laceration on her hand where she grabbed the sword. He physically, methodically, and emotionally absorbs her trauma.
Rachid's narrative function is absolutely vital here. Up until this point, we've seen how Aicha's environment strips away her humanity. Rachid's the only force trying to actively restore it. He represents the human life, the normal life, that Aicha could have had if she wasn't born in a cage.
And Aicha has always actively pushed him away. She's always been terrified of the concept of marriage and family because she equated it with her mother's death.
Right, she thought love meant death.
She believed that loving someone, marrying someone, meant either dying to give them a child or bringing a child into a world that only exists to slaughter them. She feared bringing life into a graveyard.
But the paradigm has shifted. In the face of imminent destruction, with the Sultan's siege literally hours away from breaching the walls and her family already dead, that fear of the future evaporates because there is no future left to fear.
Right.
Rachid's unconditional acceptance of her, even after witnessing the terrifying, violent darkness she is capable of unleashing, gives her a singular reason to hold onto her humanity for one more day.
He looks at this girl who just ripped a man's throat out with her teeth, and he tells her, and this quote is the emotional core of the book, "Whatever darkness resides in you is not powerful enough to burn out the good. Allah chose you to walk this path for a reason."
He validates her existence. He doesn't excuse the violence, but he contextualizes it. He tells her she's not a demon. She is a survivor holding a heavy burden.
And in that moment of profound validation, they decide they cannot wait another day. They decide to marry immediately.
Right then and there.
They find Saladin and Sidi Muhammad, two leaders of the resistance, to officiate a rushed, quiet, clandestine ceremony amidst the ruins of the forge. And their vows are absolutely heartbreaking. They look at each other and promise in this life and the next.
The contrast the author builds here is incredibly jarring, but highly effective. You have the extreme feral violence of the murder, immediately followed by these quiet, profound moments of Rachid washing her skin, kissing her scars, and binding their souls together in marriage.
But I kept thinking while reading this, it feels like a setup.
Oh, how so?
Well, Rachid acts as a lightning rod for Aicha's internal storm. He safely grounds her volatile, destructive energy so she doesn't hurt herself alive. But structurally speaking, what happens to a building when its only lightning rod is struck down right in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane?
Total structural collapse. Yeah. The building burns to the foundation, which leads us directly into the climax of the story, the siege and the birth of a monster.
The hydraulic press finally snaps, the gates of the citadel are breached, the Sultan's massive Maghribi army pours in from the outside, and the battle in the streets is absolute bloody chaos.
It's Cold War.
The sky is dark with smoke, the streets are slick with blood, and Aicha is at the vanguard, fighting like a literal demon. She is tasked with securing the main gate mechanisms, and she is utterly ruthless.
She doesn't hold back.
At one point, a Portuguese guard drops his weapon and surrenders to her. She promises to let him live if he turns the massive crank to open the gate. The man obeys, he opens the gate for the Sultan's army, and the absolute second the lock clicks. Aicha steps forward and cleanly slices his head off. As his body falls, she just whispers, "I lied."
She has completely abandoned all codes of honor, all rules of engagement. She is no longer fighting a war for territory. She is executing pure, unadulterated retribution. She has become the executioner.
And that path of retribution leads her to the ultimate target. She finally faces off against Duarte in the chaos of the courtyard, the man who tortured her sister and hung her father.
The duel is desperate and messy. Duarte is already wounded from the battle, but he is a hardened military officer and incredibly dangerous.
Right, he's a veteran.
He manages to overpower Aicha. He knocks her to the ground, pins her beneath his weight, and drives a heavy dagger down toward her chest.
And out of the smoke, Rachid intervenes. He throws himself into the melee to save his new wife. He knocks Duarte's blade away, but in doing so, he leaves himself entirely exposed.
It's a fatal mistake.
Duarte pivots, brings his massive broadsword up, and drives it directly into Rachid.
The choreography of this tragedy is devastating. The sword goes entirely through Rachid's chest, and because Aicha is pinned on the ground beneath him, the tip of the broadsword exits Rachid's back and pierces directly into Aicha's stomach.
It is a dual impalement. The visual is horrifying. They are literally skewered together on the colonizer's blade. Duarte violently rips the sword out, and Rachid collapses.
Yeah.
He bleeds out right on top of Aicha, his blood soaking into her clothes, dying in her arms mere hours after they were married.
But Duarte's cruelty is pathological. He isn't finished. As Rachid takes his final shuddering breaths, Duarte stands over them and taunts Aicha.
Can't just let them die.
No, he tells her she doesn't even get the luxury of dying at the same time as her husband. He raises his sword and brings it down, brutally, repeatedly hacking into Aicha's legs, shattering her bones and inflicting this agonizing white-hot pain to ensure she suffers as long as possible before she bleeds out.
It is the absolute breaking point. I want you to picture this. Her father is dead. Her sister was tortured and murdered. Her childhood best friend Naima is gone. Her husband was just slaughtered on top of her. Her body is completely broken. Her legs are hacked to pieces.
She has nothing left.
She is lying in a massive pool of her own family's blood. And in that moment of ultimate, unsurvivable, infinite agony, Aicha makes a choice. She fully, completely surrenders to the entity. She lets go of the last shred of human Aicha and lets the jinn take the wheel permanently.
And this is where the historical fiction shatters completely,
Yeah.
and the myth comes roaring to life. The text describes this chilling, impossible moment.
Oh, this part gave me chills.
A dying Maghribi soldier on the ground nearby turns his head and watches Aicha's transformation. Where her bloody, severed, shattered legs were, thick, coarse animal hair begins to sprout.
It's so visceral.
Her calves elongate and transform, the bones snapping and reshaping, and instead of human feet, she grows massive, fur-covered, cloven animal hooves.
The body horror of the dreams becomes reality. Her hair becomes voluminous, wild, and dark like a storm cloud. Her horrific wounds heal instantly.
She just stands up.
She stands up on these hooves, towering over the battlefield. The text says she becomes devastatingly, terrifyingly beautiful, but her eyes turn completely solid onyx black. She possesses feral, demonic strength. The girl from the forge is dead. She has officially become Aicha Candicha.
I have to pause here because this is where the author's synthesis of history and mythology is truly breathtaking.
Explain the lore for us.
Aicha Candicha is a very real, very famous figure in Moroccan folklore. Traditionally, she is known as a terrifying, beautiful female demon, a succubus of sorts, who has the legs of a camel or a goat.
Okay.
She dwells near riverbeds and dark waters, and she seduces men to drown them or drive them mad. But what Bouazzaoui does here is revolutionary. She takes this ancient campfire monster and provides a harrowing, trauma-based, anti-colonial origin story.
She gives the monster a profoundly sympathetic reason to exist. Aicha doesn't just die a tragic martyr in a courtyard. Her grief and her rage literally transcend human biology.
Exactly. She defies the colonizers' attempt to erase her by mutating into a mythical, unstoppable force of vengeance. The entity wasn't just a random demon. It was a manifestation of the collective trauma of her people, and it found the perfect, completely shattered vessel to inhabit and animate.
And the final scenes of the book, the aftermath of this transformation, they are just horrifyingly triumphant.
Triumphant in the darkest way possible.
The Sultan's army is taking the citadel, and the surviving Portuguese soldiers are desperately fleeing toward their massive galleon ships in the harbor to escape. The transformed Aicha boards the flagship, and the sound design of the prose here is brilliant.
Oh, the clopping.
Yes. You don't see her at first, you just hear the heavy, rhythmic clop, clop, clop of her hooves booming on the wooden deck of the ship.
The soldiers are terrified. They fire volleys of arrows at her. The arrows pierce her shoulders, her chest, her back, but she doesn't even flinch. She feels no human pain.
She wades into the heavily armored soldiers like they are made of paper. She grabs a man by the shoulder and, with a casual flex of her talons, literally rips his entire arm out of its socket. The violence is mythic in scale.
It's unstoppable.
She is slicing throats with her bare hands, and the text specifically notes a deeply disturbing detail. She literally eats the flesh and drinks the blood of the invaders right there on the deck. Her presence, her sheer demonic terror is so absolute that hardened Portuguese soldiers drop their weapons and willingly throw themselves overboard.
They'd rather drown.
They drown in their heavy armor in the dark bay just to escape her. She clears the entire ship.
She becomes the apex predator of the colonizers.
Which brings us to the ultimate question of this deep dive. The tagline from the book's cover is 3 words: temptress, monster, warrior. I have to push you on this because I genuinely struggled with how to feel at the end. When I closed the book, I felt a profound sense of tragedy. She lost. The colonizers took everything from her, including her actual humanity. She's just a monster now, cursed to wander the earth. But at the same time, I can see the argument that this is a bizarre, triumphant, almost feminist victory where a victimized woman becomes a literal, untouchable god of vengeance. So, which is it? Tragedy or triumph?
I think demanding it be one or the other diminishes the power of the text. It is entirely both, and that paradox is the genius of the narrative. It is undeniably a profound weeping tragedy. A young woman's life, her hopes for a family, her brilliant mind were so thoroughly, systematically dismantled by colonial violence that her only recourse for survival was to stop being human.
She lost everything.
She lost her father, her sister, her husband, and her soul. That is a tragedy of epic proportions.
But the triumph.
The triumph is in the agency of her destruction. The colonizers wanted her to die quietly in the dirt as a forgotten statistic.
I wanted
to erase her. Instead, she becomes an immortal nightmare that will haunt their descendants forever. There is a deeply cathartic, undeniable triumph in seeing the historically oppressed become an unstoppable, invincible force of divine retribution. She becomes exactly the monster that the colonizers deserve.
Wow, yeah.
She transcends her own victimhood by becoming a myth. She ensures that her people and her pain will never, ever be forgotten.
It gives me chills just thinking about it. That paradox really is the heart of the story. Let's wrap up this intense journey. We started in the claustrophobic, oppressive streets of a Portuguese-occupied citadel in 1769, where an entire population was starved, marginalized, and systematically stripped of their identity.
Yeah.
We watched the tragic, agonizing destruction of the Sanhaji family, Fuad, Samira, and eventually Rachid.
We examined the anatomy of rage and saw how unimaginable grief can hollow out a person, leaving a massive psychological void for something darker, something ancient to fill.
And we witnessed the bloody, mythological, and horrific transformation of a grief-stricken young woman into Aicha Candicha, a terrifying, immortal icon of retribution.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder long after this deep dive ends. We so often view ancient myths and folklore as just dusty campfire stories, right? Tales meant to scare children into behaving or to explain away natural phenomena.
Sure.
But Aicha forces us to look in the mirror and ask a much darker question. What if the monsters in our mythologies weren't born from magic at all? What if they were born from history?
That is a haunting thought.
How many legendary, terrifying creatures in our own respective cultures are actually just the lingering echoes of real, unspeakable human trauma? How many monsters are actually the manifestation of a desperate, violent, unfulfilled yearning for justice by people who had their voices stolen?
That brings us right back to the beginning, to the clinic. The X-ray machine is broken. You can't just point to a bone and say, there's the break. When you look at mythology, you aren't looking at fairy tales. You are looking at the murky, blood-soaked waters of human history. You, our listener, thank you for joining us on this incredibly dark, fascinating exploration of Soraya Bouazzaoui's Aicha. Remember to stay curious, to question the origins of the things that scare you, and always look beneath the surface of the stories you read. Because sometimes the monster is the only one left alive who can tell you the absolute truth about the violent world that made her.